Shalom Aleichem. This is Rabbi Kovacs. Mishnah Yomi continues for Hey Cheshvan Erev Shabbos Noach in chapter 3, Parak Gimel of Chagigah, Mishnah Aleph. Now we're on the subject of Terumah and Tahara, of purity and impurity, and recall that it was a very important topic around the festivals when not just Kohanim and not just Chaverim, who were always pure, but everybody would go up to Yerushalayim, bring karbanos, and need to become ritually pure to consume their karbanos and bring their offerings. So Mishnah Aleph explains, Homer Bakodesh me betruma. There's a stringency of Kodesh, sacrificial items, such as the meat from the Shalmei Chagigah, that are over and above those of Terumah, the portion consumed by Kohanim when they are ritually pure. Now, the Mishnah out here are going to bring actually 10 stringencies, and the first one is Shemat Bilin, we can tovel in the mikveh, Kalim betoch Kalim letruma, a vessel inside a vessel for the purposes of using it for Terumah, of all lo lekodesh. But that's not good enough for Kodesh. By Kodesh, you'd have to take, the little cup out of the big saucer and tovel them, immerse them separately in the mikveh. Typically in a mikveh, if you have one kli inside another kli and you put them both in at the same time, just like that, then sort of the buoyancy in the water will make the inner kli float up a little bit, and there won't be any blockage. The water will be able to touch every portion of the inner kli as well. But by Kodesh, we don't rely on this, this situation. We are concerned about chatzitza, about one kli touching another, and the water not touching everything, so we have you do it separately. Mishnah continues with the second stringency, Acharayim v'toch ubeit tzvita batruma. There are 3 distinct areas of contamination for a kli, potentially. The acharayim is the back, the outside. Toch is the inside. And beit tzvita is the handle. Now, what we're talking about here is a rabbinic level contamination. Certain liquids, certain situations, we're going to learn about in Taharot later, were considered rabbinically impure. Because if something is biblically impure, the entire kli, the entire pitcher, even if that pitcher has a handle, an inside and outside, the whole thing is impure on a biblical level. But for a rabbinic impurity, to make a heker, to make people realize that it's a rabbinic stringency and not a biblical level contamination, the rabbi said there's 3 distinct regions, at least for Terumah. There's inside, outside, and a handle, if the item has a handle. Avalo but Kodesh. But we don't say there are 3 different regions for Kodesh. The result here is if the handle becomes tameh, a contaminated person picked up a pitcher by the handle, then we'd say that the inside and the outside are still tahor for Terumah. So if it was a pitcher of Terumah wine, it would not affect and contaminate the wine on the inside. But if the kli, the vessel, contained kodshim, sacrificial items, then somebody who's contaminated touches the handle, then it even affects what's inside. The Mishnah brings a third stringency, hanose et a midras, somebody who's carrying midras. For example, a shoe or a blanket or a coat. Something could be sat upon or weight rested upon from a zav or a zava or a yoledet, a woman who just gave birth, and has a degree of contamination. So somebody who's carrying such an item, no say at the Terumah, can also carry Terumah of all lo at the Kodesh, but can't carry Kodesh. Now, I don't mean he literally has the Terumah under his other arm while he has a medras under the other arm. I mean it's in a kli, an earthenware kli. Now, an earthenware kli, a kli cheres, is special, as we're going to learn in Masechet Kalim, all about contamination and purity of vessels. Earthenware is special because even if something tameh touches the outside, it doesn't affect what's inside. So if he has Terumah in this earthenware kli, then even though he's holding the shoe of a zav in the other hand, it's not going to zap the Terumah. By Kodesh, we don't rely on this, and the Gemara actually brings a case where somebody was carrying the shoe of a zav, and or he was a zav, and the shoelace broke, and he just put the shoe in there with the Kodesh and contaminated it all. Big day ochle, Terumah, midras, the Kodesh. As we mentioned in the last parak, the garments of somebody who eats Terumah are considered to be midras, which is something that a zav or yoledet sits upon, and therefore it becomes tameh. It actually becomes an avatuma, a stringent source of tuma, which can contaminate other vessels. So even a kohen who's pure enough to eat Terumah, his vessels and clothing are considered midras for Kodesh, as we explained yesterday. Lo kamidat the Kodesh midat hatruma. And we're up to the fifth stringency now. The rule for Kodesh is not the same as the rule for Terumah, Sheba Kodesh, because by Kodesh, matir, you have to untie all the knots or the sleeves, uminagiv, and make sure everything's dry, umatbil. And then you can put it in the mikvah, v'achar kach kosher, and then you can tie it back again. So if somebody has a garment or a kli that has ties, something to tighten it, you'd have to untie everything and open everything up to immerse it in the mikvah to make it tahar v'kodesh. Terumah kosher achar matbil. By Terumah, the knots could still be tied in the garment, and you can still immerse it in the mikvah, and it's tahor enough for Terumah. Now Mishnah Beit continues this comparison between Terumah and Kodesh. Kelim nigmarin b'tahara. Somebody made a brand new kli. It was a potter, and he was making a pot on his spinning wheel. And he was tahor. The potter making the kli was pure. He was not contaminated. But still, tzrichin tevila lakodesh. If you want to use this pot for kodshim, it needs to go to the mikveh again to have with kodshim in mind. V'alo the Terumah, but not for Terumah. We assume it was made in tahira, and the guy was tahor enough to eat Terumah. This kli, this pot, could be used for Terumah. Now the seventh stringency, hakli mitzoref, a vessel joins together masha betocho, what's inside of it, lakodesh, for purposes of kodesh. So for example, somebody had a big basket or a big pot, and it contained a bunch of loaves of, say, a lachmei toda or a mincha, or even pieces of meat, and a tful yom, somebody who had been contaminated, had been to the mikveh that day, they have a little residual bit of impurity on them, they touch one of those loaves or one of those pieces. So if it's kodesh, everything gets contaminated. V'alo l'Terumah, but not by Terumah. So if somebody had loaves of Terumah bread in a basket, and a tful yom, or someone with residual impurity, touches one of them, the other ones do not get contaminated. Now the eighth stringency is haravi b'kodesh puzzle. Something with a fourth degree contamination is puzzle by kodshim, shlishi b'Terumah, and a third degree messes up Terumah. So as we're going to explain when we get to haras, is there are different levels and different powers of contamination. So for example, the biggest source of contamination would be a dead body. If somebody touched the dead body, they are an av hatuma, a first level, be the second level down really. If they touch a kli, a vessel, like their flower pots or their cooking pots, then that's a rishon latuma. And then if that pot touches food, that kli touches food, that would be a sheni latuma. So normally we don't keep going in tuma by normal food, but by truma, we're machmir to keep going. If that contaminated food touches truma, then it's posel truma. It's not, it can't spread the contamination, but it's considered contaminated, it can't be eaten. But by kodesh, we go another level, we go to a revi. So even something with a more attenuated impurity, as we're going to learn about in Taharos, can contaminate a piece of kodshim. The Mishnah brings a final stringency comparison. But Terumah, by someone dealing with Terumah, im nitmeit achat miyadav, if one of his hands was contaminated, haverta tahora, the other hand is still tahor. Now again, we're talking about a rabbinic source of impurity. If it's a biblical source of impurity, then simply touching it with one hand renders the entire body contaminated. So here you touch something that was tameh, that was impure dirabanan, but the other hand is okay for truma. So you can keep eating with the other hand. But kodesh, mapil shtehim. But if one hand is contaminated even rabbinically for kodshim, he wants to keep eating kodshim, he has to go to the mikveh and tovel both of his hands. And the Mishnah explains, shehayod metame et chaverta b'kodesh. One hand is considered to contaminate the other hand by kodesh, where we're very strict, avolo b'Terumah, but not by Terumah, where we're strict, but not as strict as kodesh. Yashar koach and Shabbat shalom.